In this entire module, we'll cover how to study effectively within Rome. That is, how to make sure that you, first of all, retain the information you read, and second, get that information into your Rome database in a way that aids you in connecting and organizing that information so that you can turn it into steady written output and become smarter overall. In this first video of the module, I want to persuade you that you need this and probably are not studying in the most optimal way. First, consider how curiously common it is for people to forget what they read. So picture some serious nonfiction tomes like The Selfish Gene, Thinking Fast and Slow, or something you read for your study or whatever. So have you ever had a book like this when you'd read come up in conversation, only then to discover that you'd absorbed what amounts to just a few sentences? This happened to me regularly. And when you think about in high school, all the information that you've been exposed to about geology, biology, history, whatever, that probably you've forgotten now. Perhaps sometimes this is just a memory issue. I just can't recall the relevant details. But just as often, probably you'll realize that for these complicated books, you'd never really understood the idea in question in the first place, even though you thought you had when you read the book. You'll often realize this happens to me quite often, at least, before I had this whole system that the whole course is about, that I had barely noticed how little I'd absorbed from a book until I was forced to explain it to someone in my own words. Now, I'm not alone here, because when I share this observation with others, it seems a lot of people have had a similar experience. In fact, I've begun to suspect it's the default experience for most readers that they forget what they read and haven't really absorbed many of the material in the first place. Now, many books are not small time investments, okay? Each takes around 6 to 9 hours to read. And let's say if you read half an hour a day on average, you might spend like a month with these books. And in exchange for all the time spent, how much knowledge was actually absorbed? Probably not a lot. You might wonder what explains the observation that a lot of people forget what they read. It's probably because almost everyone uses ineffective reading strategies because they have not been taught how to study effectively. It turns out that about 2/3 of American students do whatever when they're studying, like there's no rationale behind it. I've always felt this in my PhD and also in my MA and my BA as well. Everyone pretends they know how to do it and that you're not supposed to ask, how should I study? Because for some reason, it seems like everyone can do it, even though no one's ever taught you how to learn. So you just go along with the flow and hope to make the best out of it. And maybe in some domains of life, this strategy works. But unfortunately, for learning, it does not, because when we go about these intuitive, standard ways that everyone does, and you're not supposed to ask how to study effectively or to show that you're not sure how to do that, you're probably picking the wrong strategies, as is written in the great book Make It Stick, which is a source of inspiration for this course and something that I'd highly recommend. A great deal of what we think we know about how to learn is taken on faith and based on intuition, but does not actually hold up under empirical research. How we teach and study is largely a mix of theory, lore, and intuition, but not of actual evidence. So indeed, for the most part, we're going about learning in the wrong ways and also giving poor advice to those who are coming up behind us. Because empirical research into how we learn and remember shows that much of what we take for gospel about how to learn turns out to be actually largely wasted effort. We can replace less effective but widely accepted strategies with effective and evidence-based ones. Only there's a catch. You'll have to accept that the most effective learning strategies, which are, but we'll cover this later, self-testing and elaboration, are not intuitive and might feel awkward. That's a warning. But As I said, we'll cover those learning strategies in future videos. In the rest of this video, I'll explain why these popular methods are actually ineffective. So the most popular study method is highlighting and rereading the highlighted passages. As Sonke Ahrens writes in How to Take Smart Notes, which is another inspiration for this course, by the way, another great book, most students apply the very method research has shown again and again to be almost completely useless. Rereading and underlining sentences for later reading. And there is some evidence that on most surveys, about 80% of college students reports using rereading as a primary study strategy. But unfortunately, there are many experiments like the Calendar 2009 paper who report that rereading did not significantly increase performance on the assessments. Whereas most students focus on underlining and highlighting text and lecture notes and slides, and then dedicate their time to rereading those, becoming fluent in the text and the terminology, because that actually feels like learning. There's a decent case to be made that doesn't really do a lot. Rereading has at least 3 strikes against it in that it's time consuming, it doesn't result in increased understanding or durable memory, and it often involves a kind of unwitting self-deception as growing familiarity with the text comes to feel like mastery of the content, but this is actually an illusory feeling. Illusions of mastery. Indeed, it turns out that students whose study strategies emphasize rereading, but not self-testing, show overconfidence. Cognitive fluency creates illusions of knowing, but actually tests indicate that this feeling is not a reliable indicator of mastery of the material. The sense of mastery that you feel after some rereads is illusory because it's due entirely to ease of processing due to familiarity with the rhythm of the text, but it's not related to understanding. So while people commonly believe that if you expose yourself to something enough times, so say a textbook passage or a set of terms from an 8th grade biology class, you can burn it into memory by doing that. But that's not true. Rereading textbooks or just rereading certain highlights or papers is often labor in vain because you have to actually test yourself on this material and elaborate on it and process it in specific ways. To actually understand something, you must actively engage with it. That's the important takeaway. So while rereading and mass practice and highlighting give rise to feelings of fluency that are taken to be signs of mastery, these strategies are largely a waste of time unless, and this is something that we'll cover in the next video, you process your highlights in a very specific way and you do certain things with them, such as elaboration and self-testing.